There are spots within those that are great teaching moments that aren't necessarily orchestra excerpts for the pros. And why not introduce students with those spots first?
What's going on? It's Jason Heath, and I got the chance to connect with Sean Casey, who has just put out this very cool book, A Progressive Guide to Orchestral Excerpts for Double Bass, Volume 1. It's available in our sheet music store, and each one of these excerpts builds upon the next one, kind of like the George Vance Progressive Repertoire Series. Let's dive in with Sean and take a look at this great new work. How did this idea come into being? Because I think it's something that the bass world has needed for quite some time.
This idea came to me while I was driving back from Houston last June. I'm listening to symphonies and stuff like that on the drive back, and it's like, yeah, all these kids are doing these audition excerpts. We're getting ready for all region, all state stuff. They're getting all that stuff sorted out. A lot of these excerpts come up and they're like in the professional audition literature, but like only one or two of them at a time. And these kids are in all sorts of ranges, you know, for high school, all state, it's 9th through 12th grade in Texas. So they're all over the place in terms of where they're starting and coming from. So I started to think about what skills do I need to get them to play these excerpts. Those skills varied wildly. And then it was like, well, wait a second. Like, is there a way to start this from what exists already? So I went into the quad first and kind of graded each of the excerpts in the quad. And what I ended up finding was there are no level like grade 1 pieces for bass playing in excerpts, not from the standard literature anyway. However, what I did find was that if I went into those symphonies, the major symphonies that we do, there are spots within those that are great teaching moments that aren't necessarily orchestra excerpts for the pros. And why not introduce students with those spots first? It doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest, baddest spot in a Beethoven symphony. It could be something relatively simple, but introduce them to the technique and the bow strokes and the counting and the notation of those things. So I began to think about, how do I stack those elements?
How'd you come upon Beethoven 9 to start?
So Beethoven 9 I felt was such a great one because it is both rhythmic and melodic for us. You know, when that theme comes in, it's just us and the cellos when we do that. And so it's very exposed. It's easy for the listener to hear. Anyone who goes to listen to a recording of Beethoven 9, you're not going to have to hunt for it very far. That makes it easier for the student to approach because they already know how it goes. So even if you're struggling with the fingering or with, you know, the slurs or things like that, at least it's in their ear and they know what they should sound like. And so we can start to manipulate their playing from there. The biggest problems that I tend to find early in introducing these excerpts is string crossings get in the way. Slurs tend to be a big issue. And then that pivot, as you know, it's a struggle bus for a lot of people. I feel like that's a great excerpt to start including with George Vance Volume 2 or Suzuki Book 3, so that you can really layer in and get more practice on that pivot motion and that you can start getting those slurs established a little bit earlier. And then we have kind of a common ground and understanding as we get into more difficult excerpts later in the book. And what I found more interesting is when I got into the second chapter with the Tchaikovsky. When I started working on this book and I printed out my first drafts, I ended up giving it to 5 of my students in different grade levels and just kind of workshopping it and seeing like, what problems do students of different ages have with the different excerpts? And I started them at different points throughout the book based on their skill level. But I found with my younger students, I was able to get them doing it if I could get them to kind of think about it backwards. So instead of thinking about the left hand first, start thinking about the right hand first. So some of the warm-up exercises are designed with the right hand in mind. And then you bring the left hand to the right hand and make that left hand move at the speed that the right is doing. You know, we move on and we do the minor theme of that, and it goes on and we do the 3-note progressive scale for the first time. And just kind of introduce that shift on the second note concept. I studied with Jeff Bradadich and Max Dimmoff, and so we did a lot of the 3- and 4-note progressive scales, as well as 5-note progressive scales, that whole technique packet. And so most of my fingerings are built on those concepts. And so if we can start instilling those a little bit earlier, it'll make the rest of the fingering approaches a little bit simpler.
And then we get into Symphony Fantastique, which we end the sequence with the fifth movement, but we get here into the fourth movement. And what are you building upon when you get into this?
So this one is just like a standard excerpt that has come up for a lot of students with youth orchestra audition, been on some of the all region stuff in this area in Dallas. If I'm having to teach it to these kids, it's clearly something that they need to learn. And at this point, with the pivots and then the E flat major scale from the end of the Tchaikovsky Serenade for strings, we can dovetail those finger patterns together and start introducing kind of that shiftless scale in second position. We do a lot of first, we do a lot of third position. If you've been doing George Vance Volume 2, then you will already have a lot of experience in first and third positions, but this will really start getting you to think about pivoting in second position. The Mahler is a time for us because now we can begin to explore tone and homogeny of sound. Kind of a big concept for us, right? Like when we learned that Mahler the first time in George Vance Volume 1, it's all about just exploring thumb position and getting comfortable with the hand shape and being able to move the bow and make a good sound up high. When we do it in this book, and it's the second time hopefully that the student has played it, they will be focused more on like listening for the color of the string and the sound that they're getting from it and matching the tone through all the notes. And if you stay on one string for most of that, you're going to learn that homogeny of sound, but you're also going to have to learn how to shift up and down the string and get over that difficult part of the bass, the break, where, we go between thumb behind the neck to thumb in thumb position. The Brahms 2 is the same concept. We're shifting over the break, but we're working on doing it faster and without playing sequential notes. We're now doing skips.
And that's one of those excerpts that it sounds so, if you just listen to Brahms 2, that it's just this elegant musical idea that is so not idiomatic to the bass.
That comes up in not just in Brahms, but it'll come up in any film score stuff that we play. If you get like a Star Wars theme, you get crap like that all over the place. And, there's just tons of like different pieces like that that call for us to shift from one octave to the next because the composer doesn't care.
Yeah.
The composer's probably doing what Brahms was, which is he's sitting at the piano and he's like, I don't care if the bass player's got to do this.
Then we get to the next one, Beethoven 7. It's like the instructions like just probably reduce the tempo a little bit from what the recording might be, and the why, getting the hooked bowing, getting there's so many reasons why this is a good excerpt, even like the intonation on the low strings, getting the G sharp.
Slowed down tempo is legitimate. That's my favorite recording. It's Leonard Bernstein with the New York Phil, and he does it at 60. Like it's that slow. And I just think it's so cool because it's so exposed and it requires such clarity and patience to play. And if you can really instill that in students early, it's easy to play it faster. It's harder to play it slower. This comes up a lot for high school auditions and things like that. And I did give some consideration to like, should this be the beginning of the book? And then as I started to analyze it and delve in more, there's too many skills in it that like need to be built up to. Ties, retakes, hooked bowings, the trill itself is a new concept. And then on top of that, like I tend to find that most people overplay this excerpt, that it's played too loud, too heavy, too early. And so you've really got to work on playing relaxed and less so that you have room to grow throughout this one. The goal in this book was to kind of keep every excerpt in that kind of, 24 to 36 measure range, just manageable bites for middle school and beginner high school players. I'm thinking 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th graders.
But then we get into this Dvorak excerpt and really getting into arpeggios as you start to do the warm up and going across G major. I was thinking about Andy Moritz's book as I was going through that. Someone we both know well. And and so then this is next. And what skills are you getting into in this Dvorak?
A concept that we think about a lot, and we do, is the finger replacement, where we play the same note, but we just replace the finger that we're doing on. So like if you start with a, fourth finger closed G on the D string, you can always replace it and play it with second finger or with first finger. And it's like, I've actually had students who have really struggled with that concept. And I came up when I write in their music, because I put FR just to remind them, like, hey, this is the same note, but you got to do a finger replacement right here. So I want to introduce that notation in this book just for younger beginner players to begin to realize, the note's the same, but you're going to play it with a different finger. And so that arpeggio gives us an opportunity to kind of practice that. And it's something that we are going to use like throughout orchestral playing, because sometimes we need to set up the next fingering, even though we're just playing the same note over and over again.
And then getting into, we haven't really explored yet, but like so much of what we do as bass players, like sforzandos and that type of articulation and like being able to control the bow in that way. What a fun piece to do that with Dvorak New World. And you let them know if you like Jaws, guess what? You're going to love this one.
Again, appealing to our inner middle schooler, right?
Yeah. I've ruined probably a whole generation of bass players trying to teach them Beethoven 5 before they were ready to like really work on that excerpt with. There's a reason why that's asked on professional auditions, but to be able to like get the taste of what it is to do a Beethoven 8th note stroke, introducing that with Beethoven's 4th symphony is a cool, it's kind of like a little more of a, my words, but like training wheels version of what you're going to need to do in Beethoven.
I think that's exactly right. There's a bunch of Beethoven 4 was one that I overlooked for a long time, and I had an opportunity to play it last year, and it's a great symphony. Like that is an underrated Beethoven symphony. It's because it's sandwiched between 3 and 5, and then his next one is 6 and 7. It's like, well, they're all so great. Like, how do you even rank these things? And it just kind of gets lost in that, but it's still got so much good stuff in it. I'll admit that when I first sat down to look at it, it didn't play the way that it looked like to me. Because it's so fast, the cut time and everything like that, and the way that it's notated with the 8th note, 8th rest, 8th note, 8th rest for a lot of the things, it's bum, 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 looks like bum, 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 bum. And so these kids are like, wait, what? It's like, no, okay, so set the metronome. It's just staccato quarter notes. You just got to remember that, but it's notated in a weird way. So I wanted to kind of introduce that because we do see that in the Beethoven stuff. And if you're going to study 3 or 5 or 7 or 9, you're going to see that notation in those symphonies with that 8th note and that bow stroke. So I really wanted to get into that and just kind of get it super, super clear and even. And again, right hand warm-up exercises, right?
And you haven't really gotten into burning 16th notes yet, and also just outlining how to practice passages like that. You do that again with Beethoven's 4th symphony, but with the 4th movement and offering up these rhythms. And I remember learning from Jeff Braditich back when I was studying with him. I think he had these 7 rhythms. You lay out 4 different rhythms for practicing 16th note passages and just kind of getting people used to breaking things down and kind of teaching them how to break things down before they actually tackle the excerpt. That's kind of like what it seems like you're getting into with this next component.
Right. So, I don't think anywhere in the literature do we actually have a rhythm exercise written out for any of this. We'll have the rhythm and then be like, apply it to this area or this section or this passage. But I hadn't come across a book yet where someone had actually taken the passage, written out the notes with the applied rhythm, and then written out the counter rhythm to it. and just kind of showing how you got to do both to get it to balance.
And then Mozart, you didn't throw him into Mozart 40, thank you very much, or 35, or all those other excerpts that we've all been.
Yeah, there were a lot of different Mozarts that you could go with to pick from, but honestly, the Magic Flute Overture is just a great starting place. The key signature is fairly friendly for us. The string crossings aren't terrible. It builds upon all the hooked bowings and techniques that we've worked on earlier in the book, and doesn't go super high.
Yeah, I think you say in the book, just for fun, putting the Sorcerer's Apprentice in is great. Although we do run into that, and I remember doing a Fantasia concert not too long ago where you had to do it at the tempo of Fantasia. It's like beastly challenging, but it is a lot of fun. And again, we run into this kind of playing all the time as bass players.
Oh yeah, no, and like this is a lick where some of the orchestra conductors in my area who I gave the book to were playing it, and they're just like, I don't get it. This is like, it's not, there's no shifting, there's no like weirdness to it, but when I sat down and played, it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, yeah, it's a little bit of a finger twister, right? Like it keeps you in that low range. It's in 3/8, which is a weird time signature. So the bowings are kind of counterintuitive. The phrase is 3 bars long. So really in 3-bar phrase and not in 3/8, it's going to feel like a 9/8 almost.
Yeah.
But it's not notated that way. So it's a little strange. It's a great way to introduce that 3/8 as a building block for both 6/8 and 9/8.
And then, something that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but it's very cool that you included it, and it's something we do all the time. This Sibelius excerpt with all pizzicato, orchestral pizzicato. Also, that is a very prominent moment for the double bass section when you get there, and you describe in this, but how often I've had students, it's like, oh, I know how to play pizzicato from jazz band. Well, maybe for jazz band, but it is a very different skill to like play a orchestrally appropriate, maybe, or pizzicato passage.
Yeah, I mean, this is one that I come across all the time, and it usually goes unaddressed because the conductor doesn't care that much from the front of the podium. At least 90% of them don't. The good ones do care. But if they're making sound in the back, that's usually where it stops. And it's like, I want the kids to have a clearer pizzicato. I want the students to be playing with the most clarity that you can get. When that pizzicato thuds across and hits the next string like the jazz pits, if you do that with 4 or 8 bass players at all region or all state, that's going to sound muddy. It's not going to sound clear. It's not going to sound very good. So I really do take some time to introduce like how to pizzicato correctly, how to pull away from the string at kind of a 45-degree angle so that you're not slapping the string on the fingerboard, but you're also not thudding into the string next to you.
Brandenburg, include Brandenburg 3, so it's our first taste of Bach, and lots of middle schools try to do certainly the Merle J. Isaac version of this, but the skill set is kind of sophisticated to actually tackle the challenges here. So what do you get into with this one?
I mean, this one's all about like recapping all the skills that we've learned earlier. There's octaves throughout the entire thing, which is fingering challenge, and string crossing challenge all on its own. It does require a fair amount of shifting, and it's sometimes played pretty quick, depending on who's leading you. So it's a good chance for us to kind of recap, hooked bow or the double up bows, retakes, octave fingerings, just kind of rehashing the skills that we worked on earlier in the book. And then, of course, introducing that Bach bow stroke, which is a much lighter bow stroke. So you're going to be brushing the string a little bit more, maybe not quite so heavy or dug in.
So we've done some Beethoven, we've got the Beethoven stroke, we've done some Mozart, we've got that, we've gotten into Brahms, we've gotten into Bach, so we've gotten into so many of the major composers and kind of characteristic bow strokes, covered the break, and gotten into sforzatos with Dvorak, covered all these skills, and then coming back to a piece that you got into earlier in volume 1, and this is volume 1 of a series, you cap it off with Berlioz's Symphony Fantastique, The Witch's Sabbath, the dance. And if anybody has played that, I remember my bass teacher in college said this was the most exhausting of all the orchestral excerpts that he would find when he did auditions. And it really does, you name it, it happens on this page in Berlioz.
Right. And there's, this one's such an interesting excerpt to me because once I started breaking it down, yes, it's physically tiring. from a technical standpoint, it actually doesn't have that much like weird, crazy technique to it. Like the counting in it is relatively straightforward. You're in 6/8. Most of it is easily divisible and on the beats. You know, we have a few things where we start directly after a downbeat, but we should be able to start to figure that out by this point in the music. It doesn't go crazy high. I believe the highest note we get in here is an A flat, right? Or a G. Yeah. So it's really, you know, you're going up to the break, but not totally over it yet. So we're within range. And then, of course, we have trills. We've got retake bows. We've got hooked bows. We got double ups. We got double downs. Slurs across the strings. Yeah, there's a couple places with the octaves, right? It's 72. So it really does rehash all of the skills that we've built earlier in the book, and we've kind of scaffolded upon that idea all the way to the top.
Thanks for putting this together, Sean. Folks, you can check it out in our sheet music store in the description below. And if you want to get even deeper into orchestral excerpts, check out the video we've got linked up.